I never expected my sister-in-law to go so far as to sabotage me at a family gathering after my husband and I announced my pregnancy. Yet, her plan backfired in the worst possible way, leaving her on the brink of facing prison and dealing with a crumbling marriage. It was a shocking turn of events, but looking back on the history I shared with her, it somehow didn't come as a complete surprise. I am 29 years old, and I have been married to my husband, Anthony, for 7 years. From the very start, I adored everything about him and our life together, except for the fact he was related to his sister, Valerie, who seemed to bring endless negativity wherever she went. When I first met Valerie, I tried my best to keep things peaceful. Over time, though, I realized how deeply toxic and manipulative she could be. I became determined not to get on her bad side, especially since I knew the lengths she would go to if she felt slighted. Years before I came into Anthony's life, he had dated one of Valerie's close friends in his late teens. They eventually broke up because he felt pressured into the relationship. Later, when he was in his early 20s, Valerie tried again by pushing him toward another friend of hers, but he refused. That refusal led to a dramatic argument, which escalated when Valerie went to their parents in tears, demanding that her brother marry someone she approved of. Their parents didn't entertain the idea, and Anthony moved on from that chapter without much regret. When Anthony and I met, we fell in love quickly. His parents were thrilled to see him so happy, but Valerie's attitude shifted into something cold. Whenever we were together, she never missed an opportunity to mention Anthony's former girlfriends, as though she hoped he would rekindle old connections. Anthony found it strange and asked her to stop bringing up people from his past, but Valerie would respond by accusing me of insecurity. Her taunts grew more frequent, and I felt uncomfortable each time she tried to stir up issues between Anthony and me. She didn't stop at casual remarks. During family dinners, she would sometimes arrive with one of Anthony's ex-partners, claiming she had just run into them and couldn't refuse an invitation out of politeness. She monitored my social media relentlessly, even though she didn't follow me. I had a public account, so I could always see how she was one of the first viewers of my updates. If a man happened to comment on my photos, she would inform Anthony that I was acting inappropriately. Of course, he and I both recognized the absurdity in her accusations, but her behavior continued. That tension simmered for years, and I always had a nagging fear in the back of my mind about what Valerie might attempt next. I never expected, however, that her jealousy would eventually spiral to a point where she would try to sabotage me at a party, especially one meant to celebrate the joyous news of our baby on the way. Yet that was exactly what happened, and in the aftermath, Valerie would find her own life falling apart. When Anthony and I decided to move in together, Valerie urged him to break up with me. She claimed I had countless shortcomings and promised she could find someone far better suited to him. It stung to hear those words, especially after all the time I had spent trying to stay on her good side. Unfortunately, as soon as Anthony and I got engaged, Valerie's attitude only worsened. On the day we announced our engagement, everyone else was genuinely happy for us. Valerie, however, grew silent and then abruptly left the gathering, catching everyone off guard. Later, she contacted Anthony in a rage, telling him how betrayed she felt because she should have been told the news before anyone else. She then sent me a bizarre message, warning me to be a worthy spouse to her brother and reminding me that she had always been the only woman in his life. The tone felt so unsettling that I had no intention of replying. I simply left her message unread, fully aware that my lack of response would anger her even more. In the weeks that followed, Valerie made a point of ignoring me whenever she saw me. Despite that, she hovered around all of our wedding plans, including dress shopping and my bridal shower. Her criticisms during these events became relentless, and even Anthony's mother and Anthony himself told her multiple times to stop making negative comments about every little decision. Her behavior didn't change, and I began to feel genuinely stressed whenever she was near. One afternoon, while I was discussing table centerpieces with Anthony's mother, Valerie overheard and began mocking me again. She claimed my choices lacked taste, and that this was precisely why she wanted Anthony to marry someone else. Something inside me snapped at that moment, and I reached my breaking point. I let all of my frustration out, making it clear that her constant taunts and belittling remarks had become unbearable and that she was no longer welcome at our wedding. She looked stunned, as if she never expected me to stand up for myself, and Anthony's mother was just as furious with her behavior. Later, Valerie reached out to Anthony, complaining that I had humiliated her and that he should somehow keep me in check. He told her he stood by my decision, and if she didn't change her behavior, she could forget about attending the wedding. Valerie grudgingly sent me an apology. I skimmed her words and chose not to respond. With so much wedding stress on my shoulders, I had no energy to be pulled into more of her drama. Ultimately, she did end up at our wedding, if only so she wouldn't have ammunition to gossip about us afterward. I had dreamed of a wedding filled with soft pink hues and pastel accents, and everyone seemed to follow along with the theme effortlessly. Everyone except Valerie. On the big day, she arrived wearing a dramatic black gown and a veil, as though she were attending a funeral. She drifted from table to table, telling anyone who would listen that she was mourning the loss of her brother to another woman. My stomach twisted in knots each time I spotted her across the room. I noticed Anthony's concerned looks, and after a while, his parents stepped in. Valerie refused to stop causing a spectacle, and she ended up being asked to leave. I still cringe when I remember how humiliating it was. When I gave birth to my son Nate, I wanted nothing to do with Valerie. She fought to meet him, but I stood firm. Anthony and his parents understood why I felt so strongly, and they supported my decision to keep her away from our newborn. 2 years ago, Valerie experienced a tragic miscarriage with her then partner, and I could tell it took a serious toll on her. Despite everything, Anthony and I empathized, especially since we already had a child of our own. We decided to give her another chance, inviting her over so she could spend time with Nate. At first, she was unexpectedly sweet around him, and I had a sliver of hope that perhaps she had changed. It didn't last, though. Soon enough, she returned to her old ways, lamenting her misfortunes, blaming the people around her, ex-bosses, ex-partners, or whomever else happened to be the target of her frustration. She barely acknowledged any responsibility for the conflicts in her life and seemed determined to win people over by portraying herself as a perpetual victim. I began to regret letting her back in so easily. Each new complaint and accusation only reminded me that the sister-in-law I had tried to forgive was still the same person who once showed up at my wedding in a veil, mourning the idea of losing her brother. I found out earlier this year that Valerie had decided to get married, but chose not to invite Anthony and me. It caught us off guard because I had genuinely believed our relationship was on the mend. When Anthony confronted her, she insisted that I wasn't welcome because I might upstage her wedding. Something about fearing I would wear black as she had it mine. I was furious when I heard this and told Anthony how manipulative it felt. Anthony spoke with his parents, and together they decided they would not attend Valerie's wedding or contribute any funds unless she amended her behavior. Valerie broke down in tears and blamed me for causing all of the drama, even though she had admitted she wore black to my wedding on purpose. She tried to justify her actions, claiming that it was all in the past and that I should get over it. Still, Anthony's parents stood their ground, which led Valerie to reach out to me, offering a tearful apology and pleading for forgiveness. I had always known Valerie could be incredibly sweet when she wanted something, and at the time, I was eager to move forward, so I forgave her. Valerie's wedding to Justin went smoothly, and everyone had a pleasant time. Less than 6 months later, though, she turned up at our house, upset because her marriage was already showing cracks. Anthony and I allowed her to stay for a few days, during which she spent hours lamenting how difficult her husband was and how impossible it had become for them to conceive. She pinned the blame entirely on him, unwilling to consider any other perspective. Whenever she got tired of complaining about her husband, she seemed to focus her attention on our life, trying to spot problems that weren't there. As one example, I'm in the habit of going to the gym before work most mornings, sometimes bringing a change of clothes in case I'm running late. Valerie became strangely fixated on this routine, questioning why I showered at the gym or why I bothered to keep up with my workouts. I explained I liked staying fit and didn't want to arrive at the office drenched in sweat. She usually just pressed her lips together and made a show of nodding, as if she suspected I had some hidden agenda. Eventually, she and Justin managed to patch things up, so she went back home, leaving me to breathe a sigh of relief, at least for the moment. One weekend, Anthony and I went to have lunch with his parents, Marie and Jack. Valerie and her husband, Justin, were also invited. We decided to leave our son, Nate, with a babysitter because he often got restless when the adults spent hours talking. During the meal, Marie mentioned a friend of hers who had recently divorced, explaining that the husband had been unfaithful, and the friend had ended up taking half of his assets. At that point, Valerie suddenly shifted the conversation by asking Anthony if he and I had signed a prenuptial agreement before our wedding. The entire table seemed to pause. Valerie looked directly at Anthony, acting as if I wasn't even there, and waited for his response. He let her know there had never been any need for a prenup, since both he and I earned a decent income and believed in trusting one another. Valerie gave a dismissive snort and started talking about how common cheating was these days. It was clear she was implying that one of us could be blindsided at any moment. I felt my heart pound faster, realizing she was aiming her suspicion at me. She then claimed that I was secretly meeting someone else, pointing to my habit of carrying a change of clothes everywhere. She said she had noticed and felt it was her duty, as Anthony's sister, to warn him. I was stunned by her accusation and anger rose inside me. Marie and Jack immediately came to my defense, making it clear they did not appreciate Valerie's meddling. Valerie, however, did not let up. She casually joked that perhaps Nate wasn't really Anthony's son, since Nate didn't resemble him exactly. I looked at Anthony and saw a flicker of fury I had never witnessed before. It was one thing for Valerie to question my faithfulness, but it was another to bring our child into it. Anthony erupted, telling Valerie exactly what he thought of her behavior, and in his rage, he lashed out at her deepest wound. He pointed out that perhaps she had never become a mother for a reason and suggested her lost child was better off in heaven than being raised by someone so toxic. I sat there in shock, my chest tight with conflicting emotions. It was the cruelest moment I had ever witnessed between them, one that would change the family's dynamic in ways I couldn't yet predict. I watched Valerie's face crumble in shock as Anthony unleashed words I never imagined he was capable of. My in-laws, Marie and Jack, fell silent while my husband laid out every resentment he'd held toward his sister. He accused her of being a toxic force in our lives, someone who always seemed bent on tearing others down rather than building anything meaningful for herself. He accused her of fixating on my life only because she had so little satisfaction in her own. And then, in a moment so harsh it took my breath away, he brought up her inability to have children, implying it was a blessing she had not become a mother given her cruel nature. Valerie stood there, tears running down her face, glancing toward her husband, Damien, for support, only to find him speechless. I had never seen Anthony so enraged, and though it startled me to witness such anger in him, I found myself relieved that he finally defended me and our son, out loud. Eventually, Valerie ran off, and Anthony apologized to Damien for the outburst, but pointedly ignored his sister. We left soon after, telling ourselves we needed to cut ties for the sake of our own peace. My in-laws spoke to us about how far Valerie had gone, and even they admitted her behavior had finally pushed Anthony over the edge. For a full year, we heard nothing from Valerie. Our lives settled into a calmer routine, free of her meddling. Then, 2 months ago, I discovered I was unexpectedly pregnant. Anthony and I were overjoyed to think we would soon become a family of 4. We agreed to hold off on announcing it until Anthony's birthday, when Marie and Jack were planning a big celebration in their backyard. We looked forward to sharing the news with those who truly cared for us. On the day of the party, as everyone gathered, I felt lighthearted and excited. We walked into the backyard and began greeting friends and relatives, until, suddenly, I spotted Valerie. My heart fluttered with surprise and unease. We had gone so long without her, and I wondered what her presence might mean for us now. I watched Valerie approach and wrap her arms around Anthony, announcing how much she had missed him and how sorry she was for their last confrontation. Anthony, with my hand in his, directed her attention toward me, reminding her that I was the one she had tried to humiliate in the past. Valerie turned and offered me an apology, claiming she had been in therapy for months and had realized how hurtful she had been. I found myself skeptical of her sincerity but gave her a polite nod, not wanting to create a scene in front of everyone. Afterward, Anthony's parents discreetly checked on us, saying they had not expected Valerie to show up and reassuring us that if we felt uneasy, they would ask her to leave. Anthony chose not to escalate things. I decided to follow his lead, though it felt odd seeing Valerie socializing so cheerfully with everyone. She seemed unusually upbeat for someone who had previously been so negative, and I considered the possibility that therapy might actually have helped her. When it came time to cut Anthony's birthday cake, he gave a heartfelt speech about feeling like the luckiest man in the world. I felt my cheeks grow warm as I remembered how deeply I loved him, even after all these years. Then we shared our own surprise. I was pregnant, and we would soon welcome another child into our family. I heard everyone burst into excitement. My mother shed tears of joy. My in-laws beamed with pride, and close friends immediately began asking if we had any favorite baby names. Only Valerie seemed out of place. She looked thunderstruck at first, but her expression turned sour, and she abruptly walked away as though the good news disgusted her. I had a sudden flash of worry that she might try to sabotage another celebration, but more people came over to embrace me, distracting me from the tension. When lunchtime arrived, I tried to help Anthony's parents bring food from the kitchen, but they, along with other family members, insisted I remain seated and rest, reminding me that I should take things easy. I allowed myself to relax, hoping that perhaps this day would remain focused on the happiness of my husband's birthday and our growing family, even if one person refused to share in that joy. I was sitting quietly during the celebration, waiting for my husband to bring me a plate of food, when Valerie came over with an eager smile and offered to serve me herself. She proclaimed how happy she was about my pregnancy and how she wanted to make amends for all the times she had been rude. Despite my unease, I nodded and accepted the plate, trying not to cause a scene in front of everyone. As soon as she walked away, I looked down and noticed shrimp sitting on the plate. I was stunned, because my severe allergy to shrimp was something everyone in the family knew about. I set the plate aside, intending to get my own food. A few moments later, Valerie's husband, Justin, approached to congratulate me. He took one look at the untouched plate and remarked that he enjoyed shrimp, so he would finish it. Grateful that I had avoided any potential allergic reaction, I handed it over and made my way across the yard to fill another plate. Barely 5 minutes later, I saw Justin retching, then collapsing as he tried to stand. Concerned guests gathered around while he struggled to breathe. My husband and Valerie rushed to his side, and he fainted in front of everyone. Panicked relatives and friends called for an ambulance. Valerie's tearful, angry glances kept flicking toward me, and I found myself speechless with fear. No one understood what was happening. By the time the paramedics arrived, Justin appeared gravely ill. Later, we learned that he had been poisoned. My heart pounded when I realized the tainted food was originally meant for me. A plate I would have eaten had I not noticed the shrimp. I couldn't ignore the chilling possibility that if I had consumed that meal, both my baby and I might have been in grave danger. Meanwhile, my husband, our parents, and most of the guests seemed unaware of the fact that the plate was meant for me in the first place. The police collected the suspicious food as evidence, leaving everyone in shock. In the aftermath, I was haunted by questions. Whether this was some horrific accident or something intentional, I couldn't bring myself to believe it was a mere oversight. I was left with an unsettling knot in my stomach, unsure if my sister-in-law had crossed a line that none of us ever imagined she would. At this moment, Justin remains in the hospital, still recovering from whatever was in that plate of food, while Valerie stays by his side through the night. Anthony and I have been fielding non-stop phone calls from concerned relatives, all wondering what happened and who might have tampered with the food. Marie and Jack, my parents-in-law, are deeply shaken by the entire situation and have decided to stay at our place, fearful of returning to their own home. No one can understand how such a disastrous turn of events could unfold during what was supposed to be a joyful family celebration. I am afraid to tell anyone that the poison plate was originally meant for me, especially because it was Valerie who had handed it over so enthusiastically. If the police investigate this, I know I'll have to explain what really happened. I feel guilty that Justin ended up in the hospital, yet I'm terrified by the realization that I could have been the one ingesting that poison, endangering not just my own life, but also my unborn baby's. More than anything, I am now painfully aware of just how far Valerie might be willing to go. I do not want to be in her presence, nor do I want my children anywhere near her. I cannot stop thinking about the question swirling in my head. Am I at fault for handing Justin the plate that was meant for me, a plate that nearly took his life? The horror of realizing that someone, perhaps my own sister-in-law, deliberately tried to harm me has shaken me to the core, leaving me to wonder how I can ever move forward without looking over my shoulder. I couldn't sleep at all after learning about what had happened at the party. Justin remained in the hospital, recovering from the mysterious poisoning, while Valerie stayed there overnight by his side. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with worried relatives wanting to know exactly how he had fallen ill so suddenly. No one quite understood how such a seemingly perfect celebration could take such a dark turn. My in-laws, Marie and Jack, were as shaken up as I was, so they decided to stay at our house rather than return to their own. Everyone seemed unsettled, as though an invisible threat hung in the air. Deep inside, I felt torn apart by guilt. I kept replaying the moment Valerie handed me that plate, my mind whispering that I should have thrown it away the instant I noticed the shrimp. Instead, Justin had walked up, taken it without hesitation, and ended up in the hospital. My husband, Anthony, noticed my distress, hovering around me protectively. He assumed I was worried about Justin's health, but he didn't know the whole truth, that his own sister might have tried to harm me. Eventually, I decided I couldn't keep the secret any longer. That same day, Marie and Jack were still in our home, and I asked them, along with Anthony, to sit down after dinner. My heart felt like it might jump out of my chest as I explained each detail of what happened at the party. How Valerie had appeared with a plate of food that contained shrimp, which everyone knew I was severely allergic to. How Justin had taken the plate in my place. How he collapsed not long after. And how I suspected the meal had been tampered with on purpose. As I spoke, Marie and Jack were visibly stunned. Anthony looked outraged as the realization hit him. I confessed my fear that Valerie had set out to harm me and that it could have been me, along with my unborn child, suffering in that hospital bed. Marie, ever practical, suggested we review the footage from the backyard security cameras, which she and Jack accessed through an app on their phones. None of us could deny the truth of what we saw. Valerie handing me the shrimp-laden plate, me setting it aside, then Justin coming along, taking the plate for himself and collapsing minutes later. The room fell silent. My in-laws couldn't fathom why their daughter would do such a thing. Anthony battled with his fury, torn between anger and disbelief. We all sat there, trying to wrap our heads around the situation. Marie and Jack agreed that this was a matter for the police, and we decided to turn over the recording. They and Anthony also planned to meet Justin once he was stable enough, as the decision to press charges ultimately rested with him. Through it all, I felt a crushing weight of guilt and worry. I knew how close I had come to eating that food myself, and my imagination kept conjuring nightmarish scenarios of what might have happened to me and my unborn child. I found it almost impossible to eat or sleep, the knot of anxiety in my stomach growing tighter with each passing hour. Every time I pictured Justin in the hospital bed, I felt a wave of sorrow and self-reproach, recalling how I had let him walk away with the plate meant for me. Now, I wait anxiously for any news, both about Justin's condition and about how he intends to handle this revelation regarding Valerie's actions. My fear and heartbreak make every moment feel longer than it really is. All I can do is hope for Justin's full recovery and wonder how our family can ever move forward, knowing the shocking truth behind what really happened that day. It has been a month since I last sat down to share what has happened, but in all honesty, I've been overwhelmed by everything going on, especially now that I'm pregnant. My mind and body have been in constant turmoil, but here I am with an update. Shortly after I discovered my sister-in-law Lydia had tampered with the food at my husband Marcus's birthday party, my in-laws turned over the security footage to the police. When questioned, Lydia didn't even try to deny it. She broke down in tears and confessed to everything on the spot. Once my brother-in-law, Ethan, recovered from the poisoning, Marcus spoke with him about pressing charges. Ethan was understandably shocked to learn what Lydia had done. None of us believed she was capable of going so far. Marcus made it clear that Ethan would always be family to us, regardless of his decision, but he needed to know the severity of what Lydia had done. In the end, Ethan decided to press charges and also filed for divorce. Not long after, Lydia called her parents in a state of panic, begging them to bail her out. She revealed that she was pregnant. She tried to sway them by insisting they should help for the sake of their future grandchild. My father-in-law, however, stood firm. He reminded her that they were done enabling her behavior and that she had to take responsibility for what she had done. My mother-in-law was heartbroken to see her daughter facing such consequences, yet she understood this was not a situation that could be simply forgiven and forgotten. The police discovered additional proof that Lydia had deliberately tampered with the food meant for me, poison that ended up harming Ethan by accident. Multiple charges were filed against her, including food tampering and endangering life. Lydia tried to push the blame onto me, claiming that I was the reason everything unfolded this way. Ethan, however, was resolute in holding her accountable. Her court hearings will begin soon, and it's clear there is little chance of her escaping the consequences. Meanwhile, my son and I are doing as well as can be expected under the circumstances. He's still too young to comprehend the gravity of what his aunt attempted, and I'm dreading the day when I have to explain it. Marcus and I plan to tell him eventually, because we believe he deserves to know and to understand why we must keep our distance from Lydia. My pregnancy, however, has become even more stressful. Following my doctor's advice, I'm going for frequent ultrasound scans every 2 weeks. We've decided to keep the baby's gender a surprise, hoping some element of this pregnancy remains joyful and free from all this ugliness. My own parents have been incredibly protective. They worry about how the situation might affect me psychologically. They've gently encouraged me to seek therapy, especially given how my anxiety around food has intensified. I've noticed a persistent fear creeping into my everyday life, an unease about eating anything I haven't prepared myself. Marcus has been my rock, staying by my side for every appointment and taking care of as many chores as he can. I hope that, with time, I can let go of this fear and focus on the positives. A new chapter for our growing family and the love and support of those around me who truly care. Even though the nightmare of Lydia's actions isn't over, I'm trying to look toward the future with cautious optimism. 8 months have passed since everything came to light, and life has changed in ways I never anticipated. Valerie is now serving time in prison after being found guilty of tampering with my food. I chose not to attend her court proceedings, but my in-laws occasionally went and shared the details with me. In front of the judge, Valerie admitted she had harbored jealousy toward me for a long time, ever since I married her brother instead of one of her friends. She described how she grew resentful when my pregnancy announcement overshadowed the news she intended to share about her own pregnancy. She claimed her hormones led her to act impulsively, and she only wanted me to end up in the hospital rather than cause real harm. She insisted it was never her intention for her husband to eat the poison plate, and she tried to argue for leniency because of that. The judge did not believe her and gave her a sentence that will keep her out of our lives for the foreseeable future. Justin, who divorced Valerie after recovering from the poisoning, has become an even closer part of our extended family. He and I spoke about the guilt I felt, and he reassured me that I had no reason to blame myself. I wept in relief because the memory of handing him the plate haunted me for months. Despite those moments of sorrow, I am grateful to see Justin doing well and regaining control of his life. Amid all these changes, Anthony and I welcomed a baby girl into our family. Her presence has brought a spark of hope and warmth, easing some of the pain of the past year. Nate is thrilled to have a little sister and loves to help in every way he can. Watching him bond with his baby sister reminds me that even in the midst of turmoil, life can bring unexpected joys. My parents and in-laws have supported us every step of the way, doing everything they can to help us adjust to life after Valerie's betrayal. Although the memories still linger, I feel a measure of peace knowing the danger has been contained. Looking at my growing family, I feel a renewed sense of gratitude. There is a long road ahead. Therapy appointments, difficult conversations with my children about why their aunt is no longer around, and the lingering anxiety over what might have been. Still, I focus on the love within our home and the promise of brighter days ahead.